Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conway Conversations, a webinar on all things real estate. My name is Carol Bullman, CEO of Jack Conway, and I will be your host. Today's topic explores a policy change made possible recently through the Governor Healey's massive housing bill. It's made its way through the legislature, and we have some dates coming up that we're going to talk about for when it'll go into place. The upcoming changes pave the way for an ADU, which is an acronym for an accessory dwelling unit, which is a secondary residential living space to be located on the same lot of a single family home. Lots of questions around this topic. There are a lot of opportunities for buyers and sellers. We will explore those with our speakers. And we'll also talk about the structure, the way to get these things approved, and how to go about the entire process. We have an hour to talk about this topic. I have 4 esteemed panelists that are joining me today to talk about this. Feel free, as always, to express your questions in the chat, and I will pose those questions to the panelists as the topic comes up. So we're going to get started, and I'll start our introductions with Patrick Kearney. Patrick is the state representative for the 4th Plymouth District of Massachusetts, covering the towns of Scituate and Marshfield, my hometown. I've known Patrick for a long time. Patrick, as a member of the Joint Committee on Housing, Patrick is intimately involved in this process, something that came up at a coffee shop down the street from me in Scituate, and I thought it would be a great topic for this Conway conversation. Welcome, Patrick. Also joining me is Justin Davidson. Justin Davidson is the General Counsel and Director of Government Affairs of the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. The Mass Association of Realtors, as part of their advocacy effort, has been both supportive and extremely instrumental in moving the ADU policy change forward. Justin will talk about how that process has worked and how he sees it'll affect the real estate industry. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Carol.
And Nancy Lamothe. Nancy is Talent Acquisition Specialist and Realtor with Jack Conway Mansfield. I'm lucky enough to work with Nancy every single day, and I'm thrilled to have her part of this. Nancy's been a big proponent of this ADU change, and she has already been working with buyers and sellers, helping them search for both opportunities and information utilizing this ADU change. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, last but certainly not least, Bill McDonough. Bill is going to have a wealth of information to share with us about this topic. Bill is not only a friend and a customer of our companies, working a lot with Nancy and other people here at Conway, but he's the building commissioner for the city of Attleboro and town of Rehoboth. Is that correct, Bill?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. And he has been doing a deep dive into this for a number of months, and he will share the process, some of the things he's seeing along the way, and he will provide us a lot of directions as we make our way through these changes. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, Patrick, I'm going to start off with you. Help us with, I gave a very brief description of what an ADU is. This is a relatively new thing for a lot of our viewers, especially our buyers and sellers. And I think everyone knows here who have attended conversations, we have a combination of our clients, our buyers and sellers. So I welcome you all today. And also our realtors, and both Conway realtors and realtors from other organizations. So help us, Patrick, with some of the background and how this ADU process came to be part of Governor Healey's housing bill.
So first of all, I want to thank everyone for having me today. Thank you for putting this on, Carol. I think it's going to be really informative for buyers, for sellers, for agents, and everyone alike. This housing policy has been something that we've been working on for a long time. I've had the pleasure of serving the people of the 4th Plymouth District for the last 5.5 years. My entire time in the legislature, I've been on the Joint Committee on Housing. And housing, as we've seen in articles, as we've talked to constituents, as we've talked to buyers and sellers, housing is one of those things that has been an issue for the residents of the Commonwealth really since the mid-90s. And it's one of those issues that has continued to get worse. Accessibility, affordability. So as we're having discussions up on the Hill about how we can make Massachusetts a more competitive state in the country, how can we can increase affordability, how we can keep people here. The number one thing that we heard from over and over and over again is affordable housing, access to housing, and how do we keep housing affordable? And this is a really instrumental piece of legislation. We filed it on the House side, voted on it, got it through the Senate. The governor signed it August 6th. It's a $5.16 billion investment in public housing, in tax credits, in the people, in conversions of commercial properties into residential properties, but it's also ripe and full of policy initiatives that help individuals create housing as well. And part of that policy is the creation of those accessory dwelling units. We're about 300,000 livable units short of demand here in the Commonwealth, which is why when we've seen interest rates go from 2.75 to over 7%, we haven't seen these huge plummeting of prices, even though interest rates have increased by 200+%. Some of that has to do, and most of it has to do actually with a lack of supply. And it's become too unaffordable to build new housing units. We increased our international lumber tariffs under the Trump administration by like 44%. It wasn't ever fixed by the Biden administration. So just purchasing lumber to create new units has made accessibility and construction more prohibitive. So what we really wanted to do was empower as many people as we possibly could to create as many housing units as possible. And what this investment is going to do is create about 200,000 livable units by 2030. And that was our goal. And a small component of that will be the accessory dwelling units. We anticipate 8 to 10,000 of those 200,000 units to be ADUs.
Oh, that's great information. I wondered what piece the ADUs made up as part of that housing bill. And I think it's important for our listeners, Pat, as you just said, this housing policy is gigantic. It's very complicated, right? There's a lot of different information. If a person that's on this call wanted to have more information, and I would encourage anyone to go here, where would you recommend they go to get more information about the bill?
So if you look online, the name of the bill is the Affordable Housing Act. It'll pop right up. It's the first Google search. We have fact sheets. You can reach out to our office if you have specific questions. Call the State House, your state rep at 617-722-2000. You'll be able to get a directory of all your reps and senators. We have those fact sheets and we can send them out to you as well.
Excellent. Pat shared that with me when we bumped into each other to talk about this bill. And I went to that site and saw the fact sheet. It's excellent. And he has been extremely accessible. And I'm sure all of your representatives will be the same. So I appreciate the work you're doing here. I mean, this is enormously important when we start getting into our conversation with Nancy. The effects on the shortage of housing, very much affects our buyers and our sellers because our sellers need somewhere to go. So thanks, Pat. Appreciate that introduction. Justin, why did the Realtor Association jump into this early on? Why did you feel it was important?
It's a great question. I think it really comes down, there's multiple reasons why realtors view this as a priority to get across the finish line. And before I get into that, I really want to say kudos to the rep and your colleagues for making sure that this enormous housing bond bill got through the legislature, through the Senate, and ultimately signed by the governor. This was a huge success for everyone in the Commonwealth. But from the realtor perspective, particularly on the ADUs, it comes down to an easy way to create infill housing, meaning we can create new housing units on lots that have already been developed. So you don't have the acquisition cost of purchasing new lots. You can build where buildings already exist. It's infill in that way that it is, not sprawling out. And also it comes down to choice for potential home buyers and current homeowners, providing them the choice for seniors to age in the communities that they've lived in, either in their house or in the ADU, allowing children, if the parents so choose, to stay in a house a bit longer to save towards the purchase of a house. And you think of the downstream effects from that. If you have, children in their 20s living in that accessory dwelling unit, they have the independence of their own property without now using up a rental that could go to somebody else. Also, multi-generational families wanting to live together under the same roof, but have the separation of and the independence of their own units. And of course, also just the option to rent out that unit if they so choose to provide additional income. So really providing that choice and making homes with ADUs more accessible has really driven the realtor involvement in this. And this goes back to when I started with MAR over 10 years ago, when we had a president, David Waluka, who used to make the comment in testimony that, Fonzie couldn't live in Massachusetts because you couldn't have a unit over the garage. And I always thought that really distilled it down to how simple this policy is, but how much of a change it can make for people. So that was behind the realtor involvement.
I love that. Okay, I love the Fonzie statement. I'm not certain that you probably remember that show, Justin, but
I do, but I think that
definitely do.
I'm running out of time with that joke. I understand.
I know, it's so true. I love what you said about both young people, just starting out maybe out of college or high school, or newly married, or just starting their life, that cannot afford their own towns. So the opportunity there. And you also talked about seniors, and that really resonated with what Pat talked really introduced about. This is about accessibility and affordability. And I'm pretty certain every single person that is on listening today and will listen in the future can relate to the fact that our housing in many cases has become very difficult to afford. So that I love the way you put that. Justin, I'm going to ask you to back up just a little bit. As I mentioned, we've got buyers and sellers and realtors on our call. For the buyers and sellers, maybe you could just tell them a little bit about who the Mass Association of Realtors is.
I would love to. Thanks for that opportunity. We are an association of approximately 25,000 realtors across the state. Of course, that means that they are members of the National Association of Realtors and agree to abide by a higher code of ethics than what is included in the standard license law. As the state association, we advocate on pro-housing policies to try and develop more of that much needed supply in Massachusetts. We've seen that dearth of housing supply, which has led to the problems that Representative noted: higher costs, tougher accessibility. So we're trying to rein in those costs by bringing more supply to the market. We are driven by our members through a policy committee, our government affairs committee. So it is our members making those decisions and directing us to lobby on behalf of them.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's always a great reminder for us as realtors, how important that is. So I appreciate that advocacy and the leadership. Nancy, both Patrick and Justin talked about accessibility and affordability, and you're on the front lines. You're talking to buyers and sellers every day, as are all your colleagues here at Jack Conway. How does this affect them? What type of opportunities do you see?
Well, I see a tremendous amount of opportunity in this, and kind of what got me started in doing a little bit of research and digging and really trying to understand what our state was doing. I appreciate MAR and their support and being able to advocate for things of this nature, because it does greatly impact our customers, the consumer, which then inadvertently impacts us as well. So one of the things that I started noticing as a trend for my own particular customer base is I had a handful of customers that were approaching me and saying to me, we need to move out of our current home, but we have no place to go. The inventory is very, very low. And for our needs, we need something that is smaller, would like to downsize. And we would like to be able to afford it. So what I started finding, and they were then requesting, because they were having a double issue. They themselves were having an issue, but then they had adult children that were encountering the same exact problem. In my particular town, I live in Attleboro, and this is kind of what prompted me to reach out to Bill McDonough. In Attleboro, we had ordinances in our city that would not allow ADUs or would not allow those kinds of structures. They had very strict requirements on what type of, we couldn't have in-laws per se. So I was trying to figure out, obviously, solutions to my customers' problems and how can we be creative? And that's when I stumbled. He introduced information to me about this housing bill. And so I started digging deep into it. I created, based upon Representative Kearney's, what he had mentioned in reference was the fact sheet. So I went to the state website and I actually printed off that fact sheet, and I start now presenting that to my customers as I'm meeting with them. And it's an opportunity for us realtors to really think outside the box, be solution driven agents towards our clients, and making sure that we have a good understanding of it, and also realizing that we have tremendous amount of resources that we can actually lean on to get the information.
That's great. Nancy, you covered so much, and you know that's a perfect segue to Bill, because we talked about the problems, affordability, accessibility. We've talked about a lot of opportunities for our buyers and sellers. Now, Bill is going to walk us through the down and dirty, the details of all of this, and there's a lot to it. So, Bill, talk about how this, from your perspective, affects our cities and our towns.
Well, as far as the bill itself, they signed it in, I think he said August 6th. This part of the bill, the ADU section, doesn't go into effect until February 2nd.
February 2nd.
Yeah, the state gave about 6 months worth of time in order for cities and towns to be able to modify their existing bylaws and ordinances, or some of them don't have ordinances on the books at all. Gives them an opportunity to regulate it to the point that, if they would like to get it on their books that way. So with that being said, the towns, the cities and towns are getting an awful lot of feedback from people, from the folks. So I know that they're getting together to get it straightened out. Most of the ones that I've talked to are using it as a benefit. To be able to expand it, to put it in there, to put it on their bylaws or ordinances, to showcase it, basically, to let it be what it wants to be. You know, the amount of feedback that I've gotten has been extraordinary. There's been so many people asking the questions about what, you know, for the clarification of what it means. It's so new to some people. They're so excited to be able to possibly be able to do this and be able to stay in their house, on their property, so to speak, instead of selling it and trying to go someplace else. Now they can sell it to their kids, and they can build this either attached or detached section. So an awful lot of that is at play. But for the cities and towns, that they're just, you know, for the city like Attleboro is ecstatic about it. The mayor here is over the moon with this bill. Can't wait to get some of it started. We've had an awful lot of interest in it from folks, and we're working on plans now for multiple people on their properties. So it's, you know, even though it hasn't taken effect yet, it'll be here before we know it.
Bill, so the bill itself obviously is a Massachusetts state. It's part of the housing bill for the state of Massachusetts. But it sounds like, from what you've expressed to me, there could be differences with the towns or communities. So given that, what advice would you give for a buyer or a seller or a realtor looking for more information? What should they do?
Well, they should certainly contact the building commissioner of the town that they're looking in. Find out from that building commissioner, zoning enforcement officer. They'll have the information that's needed. Some towns, they could put restrictions on this with setbacks and certain size limitations. They could put site plan review requirements on it. It's not a lot. They can't deny it, so to speak, but they can put reasonable requirements on it. So each town, just like any zoning in across the Commonwealth, it's every town and city is different. For this, most of it, the bones are going to be the same, because the Housing Act actually says that there's certain things that cannot be restricted. So for the bones of it, it's going to be basically the same, but there will be some tweaks and things like that with each town and city.
Okay. So you mentioned the effective date. Patrick, I'm going to come back to you for a moment. You mentioned the effective date, February 2nd of 2025. And Patrick, Bill had talked about the town and the zoning and the difference between the state and the towns. Who is the overarching governing body for this?
Yeah, so I'm glad we're actually talking about that. So I know one of the questions that you had sent me, and we had talked about at Lucky Finn that morning was like, what is the actual law saying as it relates? So there are going to be, we want towns to have some flexibility. We understand that, you know, Worcester, Boston, Lawrence, New Bedford are not the same cities and towns as Lenox, Massachusetts, as Situate, as Marshfield. So we understand that there are going to be all sorts of different considerations as we look at this, but we do set a kind of a bare state minimum on what's allowed. So the definition of accessory dwelling unit in the bill, and it's not too long, but it says it's a self-contained housing unit inclusive of sleeping, cooking, and sanitary facilities on the same lot as a principal dwelling, subject to otherwise applicable dimensional and parking requirements. That maintains a separate entrance, either directly from the outside or through an entry hall or corridor, shared with the principal dwelling, sufficient to meet the requirements of the state building code for safe egress. It cannot be larger than the gross floor area of 1/2 of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. And it's subject to additional restrictions as may be imposed by municipalities, including but not limited to additional size restrictions and restrictions on prohibitions on short-term rentals, Airbnb type of stuff. However, no municipality shall unreasonably restrict the creation or rental of an accessory dwelling unit that is not a short-term rental. So the definition, although specific in some cases, is vague in others. We know that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, it falls under Governor Healey, is going to promulgate some regulations further on this issue. But what we really wanted to say is we are by right allowing people to build a 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit so that they can age in place. I think the pandemic taught us a lot about nursing homes. I wouldn't want anyone that I was related to going into a nursing home, and having a unit next door that allows families to age in place, that keeps affordability reasonable, that allows young people to have their own space to start their families. This is a really, really unique opportunity for folks. And I think we at the state level realized that this accessory dwelling unit piece was the most important. I mean, Justin was monitoring some of the housing hearings with the Realtors Association. I'm really glad you brought up all the advocacy that they do. There were a lot of discussions around how we make housing in Massachusetts affordable, discussions about rent control, which many of us know doesn't actually lower the cost of housing. Many discussions about a local transfer tax on real estate sales of up to 2%, to create an affordable housing trust fund in some of these municipalities. I heard from many of the realtors on this call, how that would impact their ability to sell real estate in parts of the Commonwealth. So there were a lot of ideas that were thrown out. There were a lot of people advocating for things. There were a lot of people advocating against certain things. But this ADU piece, I think, was really the cornerstone of addressing families, young people, elderly, cost of childcare, cost of nursing home care, and really happy to be talking about it, but also, you know, kind of promoting that 900 square feet isn't huge, but it's not a closet either. And
No.
it's something that I think is going to be really impactful for the people of the Commonwealth.
You know what I just love about this too is I was one of the people, as you know, that reached out and was not in favor of the transfer tax. You know, when we see transfer tax from a realtor perspective, from our buyers and sellers perspective, is that's a tax. It's an increased expense. And what I really love about the ADU is it's creative. I mean, it's really working within something we already have to make it possible. So I really commend you for doing that. And Justin, over to you. Are you pleased with the outcome of you know, the housing bill as a whole and specifically the ADU component of it?
I hope he
Yes.
is.
I was going to say I can answer it with one word, absolutely, but I'll go on to answer that. But yeah, it's an incredible bill that went through really what you want to see from your government, which is the due diligence, the debates to make sure that they are putting forth the best law that they can, the financial investments in housing, the policy changes, all good to move Massachusetts forward. So yeah, it's a great bill. We're thrilled that ADUs could be such a key component of it. It is something that we've lobbied for years, including providing draft language and different iterations of it. So really excited to see this and looking forward to the implementation.
Yeah, we are too. You know, it's exciting. We, at Jack Conway, we represent obviously the wonderful state of Massachusetts, some parts of Rhode Island and a small part of New Hampshire, but we do business in a lot of other parts of the country with our sister companies. And, you know, we're really fortunate to live in a state like this where our, you know, our property values are solid and strong. People feel good about that investment. Because there's other parts of the country are not in that situation, you know, values are not holding as strong. And so that's a good thing to have, because that's in some cases our largest investment, but it provides such challenges. So to have our state advocacy be helping with some of those challenges, I think is exciting. So, Bill, question for you. You know, one of my biggest questions, my husband and I just took an amazing trip in our motorhome across the country. And, you know, in other parts of the country, you can see these large pieces of land with many structures on them, you know, mobile homes and broken down campers and tiny homes and all sorts of things. So I posed that to you when we were going over this. And I think one of the biggest questions that people have in their mind is, where do mobile homes fit in this? Where do mobile homes and
Tiny houses.
tiny homes, thank you. Tiny homes fit into all this. And I was fascinated with the information you provided me. So if you could share that with our listeners.
Yeah, again, that's going to fall under the zoning aspect of each municipality. But for the most part, mobile homes, you know, we all see mobile home parks in different neighborhoods. The zoning for the town is going to have that specific for mobile home parks. So mobile home, an ADU, you can't just take a mobile home, roll it into the yard, connect it to water and sewer and electric, and call it an ADU. That's not how cities and towns are going to look at it for the most part, I would imagine, because their ordinances state otherwise. The same thing with a tiny house. Most of these tiny houses that you see, they're not built on site. They're built someplace else. They're brought in. Massachusetts has, you know, we have manufactured homes that are installed all the time on foundations, but you know, the infrastructure of that is all put together in warehouses where we have state inspectors there who inspect it, and then any of these manufactured houses have to go through the program in Massachusetts in order to be permitted in any of the cities and towns. So the tiny house part of this is not fluid, let's put it that way at this point. You know, I was doing some research on it this morning just to look up tiny house. I kind of look up a spreadsheet of what towns and cities allow tiny houses. And I did find for the majority of what I found, it was in Western Mass, in some areas that don't even have zoning. But it looks like it's gearing up. You can see the talk of it coming up. I don't know how the state's going to regulate that, but right now it's municipality driven. But so as far as that goes, general answer is a tiny house, you just can't buy one on Amazon and put it in your backyard.
All right, so it's going to depend. I was just thinking about those Sears. Whenever I'm going back a bit, a few people won't remember this, but those Sears, you could buy a house on Sears catalog.
Yeah.
So we can't do that anymore. But they can't buy a home on Amazon and put it in their backyard. So, but they could, depending on the municipality. Correct?
And the answer to the tiny house thing, like if somebody wanted to build a small house, that could be done. You know, what I'm saying is that buying a pre-built tiny home and having it delivered and being able to just plug it in and live in it, we're not there yet.
Not there, but we could get there.
Absolutely. If somebody wanted to build something, you know, it couldn't be on wheels, on a chassis, it could be on a foundation, on a slab even. They could do that. They could build that from the ground up. Even
Okay,
if it was a tiny house, would still have to be connected to septic and water and all that and electricity, but that could be done. But just to buy one off the street and have it delivered is not something that.
is some things. No, talk to us about stretch codes and how that would come into play when it comes to.
Yeah, I looked into that a lot too. The stretch codes, you know, I believe is for an accessory structure that's under 1,000 square feet. I don't believe the stretch code comes into play. So this would be the case, right? Because the largest it could be is 900 square feet. So I think that the R values and the energy code would go by way of you know, whatever we have. It's not like you're doing an addition or a garage or something like that that's under that 1,000 square feet. So that part of it would not hold true to it.
Okay, interesting. And just, would you do me a favor and just define what the stretch code is for the people that are listening that don't know?
Well, the stretch code is an alternative green communities initiative by the state that started, you know, quite a few years ago. And to my knowledge, I don't know, but I think that it's probably, I know the majority of cities and towns have adopted the stretch code. I know it's a 3 to 5 fingered type of green communities aspect where it opens the door to a lot of grant money opportunities and things like that. But what it does is it's an over and above the state requirement for energy code. And the state in its path to try to get to that carbon footprint that they're looking for is very, very, very advanced in that state, in that stage of stretch code. So the stretch code, 9 times out of 10, you live in a community that has that is stretch code. And
So
that is typically really comes into play mainly on new homes or in additions that are over 1,000 square feet or renovations that are double the size of your house.
Okay. Talked about stretch code, talked about septic versus town or city.
Yeah, that's the septic aspect of it. Septic and sewer would be a big player with the ADUs. If you're going to do an attached ADU, it's just like putting an addition on your house. If you're adding a bedroom or two, your septic system is going to have to comply with the usage. So if your septic system is a three bedroom septic system and now you're adding 2 bedrooms, you're gonna have to expand that septic system. If you're doing a detached, if you plan on doing a detached ADU, it's possible that you could put a separate system in. But now we're talking about, it takes up some room on the property. It's just like a Title V type of setup where you're adding bedrooms. So it's going to affect the septic. If you have a sewer, it's not going to affect it at all, right? You tie right into through the house to the sewer. The same thing with water, well water, and city water, town water. It's an easy hookup for town water, but with a well, you're going to be adding in, you know, bathrooms, bedrooms. You have to just make sure that it's compatible. And
Right.
the health department, that with those questions, if you have septic, one of the first trips you're going to take is to the health department to ask them questions.
Thank
Carol,
you.
if I could chime in really quickly
Yes.
here, I think that water and sewer question is super important. We heard from a lot of town administrators and a lot of local elected officials that additional housing units would put strain on water and sewer systems. You know, as well as I do in Situate, we're building a new treatment facility. Part of this investment included 175 million in housing works grants for municipalities to encourage them to create more housing units. So for the real estate agents that may be also on planning boards or local elected officials or talking to those local elected officials, we did try really hard to put a significant investment in this bill to allow municipalities to build more housing and get funding for water and sewer upgrades to support that housing. So there's 175 million in the bill to help local municipalities do that, and 25 million in grants to municipalities for planning around zoning water, sewer, infrastructure projects. We don't want to say we have these grand ideas about housing production and then not make the critical investment in our municipalities to make it happen. So we tried really hard to put money in there for planning and for upgrades to the system.
That is such a great point. And, you know, having been to many town meetings in my town, that would be the first question I think a lot of people would ask. You know, where is that? Where's the money coming from? You know, how does that affect us for our utilities? So thank you very much for that. Nancy, as far as your clients are concerned, you as a realtor, you know, there's a lot of information here to take for our clients to take in. What type of questions are you getting? What type of guidance would you provide your buyers and sellers?
So one of the things that I like to do is rely on my resources, right? Because I'm not necessarily an expert in legislation. I'm not an expert in zoning, building codes, all of that type of stuff. So I built this network of team around me where I actually try to go into the local municipalities that I work in and become very familiar with the planning board employees, people in the building department, people in the health department, talk to the health agent. This is a topic that every municipality that I have walked into and had discussions with, they're a wealth of information for me. So I think as a realtor, you know, that's super important to have. And of course, like Representative Kearney said, if you get that fact sheet, it's a great opportunity to actually have that discussion with your clients, to be able to show them that there are creative ways that we can actually solve a problem that they may be having. One of the things that I noticed recently is that there are a handful of manufacturing companies inside of the state of Massachusetts that are already gearing their businesses up to accommodate for sales of these ADUs. So that to me is a very fascinating opportunity for us as realtors to kind of investigate, dig deeper in, and really reach out to some of those companies, have discussions with them. Find out, you know, and a lot of them, from what I have seen, they originally were businesses that kind of started in the shed building business. And now they're shifting as a result of what this new housing bill has come about. And every single one of their websites really talks about the ADUs, the new housing bill in Massachusetts. What does it mean? So it's really, really fascinating to see. For us as realtors, you know, we try to make sure that we're that point of knowledge and contact for our clients. And so if we can actually educate ourselves, become very familiar with all the municipalities and the departments within those municipalities, we can better serve our clients.
Yeah, such an important point. Before I go on to a next question, feel free, if anybody has a question for any of our panelists, just jot it right in the chat. Nobody can see your question, just we can, but feel free to ask questions. Patrick, I think you were just about to comment on something. I heard someone about to jump in. No? Okay. Bill, what are you finding is the most common structure that people are interested in putting up in their property or creating on their property?
Well, it's you know, it depends, right? In Attleboro, it's probably more likely going to be attached or existing detached garages that are already there, that they can renovate into something. Our house lots are a lot smaller here in Attleboro than they are in, like, say, Rehoboth, where Rehoboth, they have 60,000 square feet and 200 feet of frontage. So they have the room. But again, we go back to the septic, you know, the septic and the well, you know, they have to, but for the most part, they can fit it. Because again, it's not a very large, it's like putting a detached garage on your property. I've had 2 or 3 people already come to me with plans, in Rehoboth as far as detached units. In Rehoboth, we allow in-law apartments by bylaw, but they're limited to 750 square feet. You have to register with the registry of deeds that it can never be rented. It has to be by a family member. All that stuff will be going out the window now with the new Homes Act. You can't make it, can be rented to anyone. You can't make anybody register it with the registry of deeds. You can't tell them they can't be rented to anybody besides family. All of that opens it up for what we really need, right? So with that, it's what I see mostly in Attleboro is attached, because we've never allowed, for years, we've been working with people with plans that we're putting in basically what looks like an in-law apartment. We've been trying to make it so it looks like, you know, an extension of the single family living area. So it was all would fall under one. We've been helpful with this for years, even though we've never had the ordinance in place to do it legally. So we've done so many different ways to make it work that way. So now it just opens up the door to, you know, if anybody has any questions, they know they can come in and ask, and we'll sit there and almost draw the plans for them. That's how, you know, that's how open we are about it.
Carol, can I just interject real
Absolutely.
quickly? I would tell for consumers, if there's any consumers or homeowners watching, one thing I always advise is ask for permission, not forgiveness, when it comes to the towns. So before you have something delivered to your home, you're 10 times better just going to the town first, asking for the proper permission before you actually try to ask for forgiveness.
That can be costly at times, yes.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Absolutely. And the proper place for them to go to, start with the building department, the building commissioner. And you'll be looping in. And, you know, it's interesting. You had talked about all the different things the towns have to look at. That was the reason that the state had given more time for this part of the bill.
I would think so, yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, I mean, it even says it in the act. It even says that that the portion of the act pertaining to ADUs is effective in 180 days on February 2nd, 2025. So there's an opportunity to consider zoning changes before the changes become effective.
That's huge. I'm sure there's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Justin, what's next for the realtor community? Is there a role that the Mass Association of Realtors will be playing as realtors and buyers and sellers start to, you know, navigate these changes?
Yeah, I think as has been said, you know, we are now heading into the regulatory process. So the legislature passed the bill, but then granted authority to the governor's administration to sort of fine tune the rules, to give permissions to cities and towns to do things so long as they're not creating unreasonable restrictions. So what that means is our advocacy efforts on this issue aren't done. We'll continue those through the regulatory process to make sure that there's no overreach in those regulations, to make sure that the spirit and the will of the law to allow ADUs by right is continued. So we'll do that by providing comments on proposed regulations and working with the executive office to really make sure, as I said, that the spirit of the law is followed, so that we are seeing these ADUs allowed by right, and that communities aren't trying to stretch that definition of reasonable restrictions into the unreasonable territory. So, I mean, our discussions with the administration have led us to believe that we'll be seeing that process get started fairly soon, so that they can finish those regulations in time for the February implementation. So I think the biggest piece is done, that getting the law over the finish line, but still fine tuning to be done through the next process.
All right, so there's work to be done. It doesn't surprise me with a detail like this. It does involve a lot of different aspects, as Bill had mentioned. Patrick, you had talked about water and sewer and some of the other things that come up. Will you be taking that time between now and February 2nd to sort of fine tune that process as well with the towns?
That's one of those things that's going to be town specific. There are towns that, you know, have Situate, for example, there's town sewer, and then there are properties that are on septic. There are municipalities that have no town sewer, and all of their properties are on septic. So it's going to be more individual investment versus the town. And then there are cities, obviously, where most, if not all, of the properties are on municipal sewer. I think what is going to vary significantly from town to town is the cost of hooking those ADUs up. If you have a separate detached accessory dwelling, you're probably looking at thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars in hookup fees. So that's a consideration when you're building an ADU, because that part of it is expensive. With that said, the piece that I think we haven't touched on, and it's kind of the second part of that ADU definition, is there isn't an owner occupancy requirement. So when you have folks that are trying to buy real estate as an investment or to live in a property and make that property more affordable, I think one of those considerations and discussions should be, as you build equity, as your family gets older, if you want to downsize or upgrade or any of those things, you may be able to keep that property as part of a small investment portfolio where you're renting the house, you're renting the ADU, you move into something else, and there is no owner occupancy requirement.
That's a really important point. And so just to give some examples, and as I'm listening to all of you, I feel like the most common use of an ADU, I would think, would be the room over the garage, maybe the garage itself, or maybe a basement. We haven't talked about basements, but with that topic you just talked about, so if I'm looking to sell my house, but I can't find anything that is within my price range or that to my liking, I could stay where I am and rent out my basement, or I gotta live in the basement and rent out upstairs, is basically what you're saying.
No, I'm saying like the basement part is a little more complicated because you need to have sufficient egresses to get in and out of the living space. There've been some nightmarish illegal apartments in cities where the structure has gone up in flames and people have not been able to get out. It's very sad. So we really want to enforce and be really clear on the egress part of the law on the ADUs. But what I'm saying is, if you're buying a home and you decide that you are going to put an ADU on the property and now you have two structures, you don't have to live in either one of those structures. You can rent both of them out. So as you work with residential investors, when they look at a property, if someone you're talking to now is saying, hey, I have to live in one of these structures, that's no longer the case. If you're looking at someone that's trying to build a new unit on a property with a single family home, they're able to rent both of those, and that can be a rental investment income opportunity for folks that are in municipalities right now that have those restrictions.
That's really interesting. Yeah, Nancy, comment on that if you could.
That actually brings up a good point, Patrick, also for realtors, to make sure that you let your clients understand and know that they need to reach out to their lender to find out how would the lenders view, if you're looking to finance one of these ADUs, how is the lender taking a look at this? If it's a room over a garage that you're trying to convert, you could probably take out a home equity line of credit, something of that nature. But what if it's a separate structure in your backyard and you're looking to purchase or finance that piece of it? If it's something along the lines of similar financing for mobile homes, we would consider it chattel, or like a car loan or something of that nature, not necessarily a mortgage. So I think that's something that I would urge consumers to have those kinds of discussions with their financier or their loan officer, their bank, to figure out how do they fall into this whole ADU discussion.
To piggyback on that, there's also a lot of government subsidized loans for first-time home buyers. And if there's multiple structures that are considered livable units on those properties, you're eligible for increased financing, different terms, in some cases better terms. If you're going to live in the ADU and rent the house, it really does provide some opportunities, some more opportunities for young people that are trying to get into the real estate market where it's very unaffordable, but you might be able to get some first-time home buyer considerations if there's two livable structures on the property.
That's a lot to think about too. And I think it's important to, as you said, Nancy, to rely upon the people that you can trust. And, your trusted advisors, your realtor, your lender, certainly the towns, the state. So there's a lot of great resources here. Talk about next steps. So we've got the bill coming through February 2nd. There'll be more information, first of all. So Justin, from what you said, everything we know right now, there could be slight adjustments that we'll learn between now and then.
Yeah, so what's in the law now is the law, but there will be regulations that'll sort of supplement that law to further define, I think the key pieces, making sure that unreasonable restrictions are defined. So that'll be added to it, I would say. It won't change the law, but further define it.
All right, great, excellent. Nancy, the point that Patrick had made about now possibly 2 dwellings on your property, that there was only 1 before, and they're both legal. From a real estate point of view, does that provide you the opportunity to market that differently than the way you would market this now? And how do you see that affecting our inventory and the opportunities for our sellers and our buyers?
I think first off, it 100% is a beneficial thing for us as realtors in the way that we can market that. Because I think based on my own personal experience over the past 6 months or so, I feel that there's definitely a demand and a need for it. So being able to market that, I think that will be extremely beneficial to realtors as well as the consumer. From the standpoint of being able to figure out how in terms of inventory, you have a lot of people, like Patrick said, that are trying to break into the housing market. And you may find that it's a situation where maybe it's not necessarily their own family member that lives in the primary residence, but now you have this ADU dwelling that is in the rear of the home, that is a perfect setup for someone that's elderly, that's looking for single level living, downsizing, and it becomes extremely affordable for them. And I think that there's definitely opportunity to be able to market in that way as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, because I had breakfast with one of our realtors, Rosemary Sullivan, out of our Hingham office yesterday, and we were talking about her daughter is living in a carriage house behind a person's home in Los Angeles. And I thought, that's a perfect opportunity that we'll be able to hopefully take advantage of in our area. So I think that's really important. Bill, what do you think is the most common, the one that you're getting the most questions on? Because you're getting a lot of questions. What are you seeing as the ADU that most people are interested in following through with?
Mostly it's like an in-law. The parents, the kids are the parents, instead of selling their house or the parents are selling their house and building something on the kid's house, or, I just did one yesterday, an in-law in Rehoboth, where the kids are coming home from wherever they've been, and they put a small addition on the back of the house, but they're going to slide in there and the kids are going to move in the main part. You're finding it now so often because people are living longer. People don't want to go into nursing homes and things like that, and kids can take care of their parents a little bit better that way now, and that's what you're seeing. They haven't pulled the trigger on any of these detached ones, but a lot of people are interested. I wouldn't be surprised if people start building new houses with ADUs.
Yeah.
I know that's the first thing I thought of when I started thinking about the development of places. I won't be that long before somebody's doing a development that has the detached garage with an ADU above it.
Yeah.
There is some things, I'm sure, just like anything. I know that you can go to this is one of the big things with building departments. You can go to a building department today and they're going to tell you one thing. You go to a different building department, they're going to tell you something else. There's one code, everybody looks at it a little differently. So I stress the point, you need to speak with the departments, because as you just talked about, renting out the ADU or living in the ADU, renting out the house, you're going to have some people that may not let a separate electric meter be on that ADU. They may say it has to come off the electricity from the house, because it is it's not its own principal dwelling. It's an accessory to the dwelling unit there. So you're going to have towns and municipalities are going to look at that differently. You just make sure you do your homework.
And if I can add to that, there are folks that are like Bill that are trying to engage folks that are trying to build, that are super responsive, that are working with people. There are folks in other places of the Commonwealth that are not as responsive, that are not as excited about building. My recommendation is to talk to them, but also to know the law, and to have folks that, if you don't know the law, to engage an attorney or a real estate agent or broker, because sometimes when you're being told no, it doesn't really mean that you can't do something. It means that the
100%.
person that's telling you no doesn't want you to do it. And
Mhm.
so it's important to engage with them, but it's also important to back yourself up and know the law. And the whole reason that we are doing this at the state level is to strongly encourage municipalities to let people to do this. I was at an event last night at Mulaney's, and one of the biggest things that came up, I'll keep it brief, Carol, but it was the cost of childcare. I know you have a family with a bunch of grandkids and so forth, and I come from a big family too, and I know that it isn't possible without a lot of people in the community pitching in and helping out. And when housing is unobtainable for those folks, it makes childcare really difficult. And when they're living in the community, it makes it really easy. And the cost of childcare for toddlers in Massachusetts is about $19,800 of after-tax money for kids. So it almost disincentivizes somebody in a relationship from going to work, or it makes work for a single parent really, really difficult. So I think this is one of those things where I would, again, encourage everyone to know the law and to let this law empower you and your families to deal with aging in place, to deal with childcare, and to also keeping the fabric of the communities as we know them and love them. This isn't creating insane amounts of multifamily housing zoning districts. It's a couple of garage apartments, and I think it's going to be a huge, impactful thing for a lot of families here.
I love that perspective. And you just hit upon one of the unintended consequences in a positive way as far as childcare. And I couldn't agree more. And that we can't be afraid of change, and make sure that you know the law and you're asking lots of questions. With that, I'm going to ask in the last few minutes of this, each of you maybe send out one piece of information to our listeners that you don't want them to forget. If they heard nothing else in this last hour, what do you want them to remember about this opportunity? Justin, I'm going to start with you.
Oh man, right into it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the key piece is to work with experts. You've heard from experts here today, Nancy and Bill. Make sure you as consumers are checking in with them. I think you can see the value that they bring to the table. So that would be my takeaway.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Justin, for being part of this and for all the work the Massachusetts Association of Realtors has done to get us here.
My pleasure.
Nancy, what would you like to leave our listeners with?
I would echo the same thing Justin said, lean on your team. If for consumers, we are part of your team. For realtors, people like Justin and Patrick and Bill, they are our team. And don't be afraid to reach out and lean on them for those answers.
Excellent. Thank you. Bill, what sage advice do you have for us?
Well, I would say, kind of jumping on what Patrick was just speaking about, if this is something that interests you and if it's something that you're going to think about moving forward with, I would stress, take a look at your local government, because there's probably zoning board meetings, planning board meetings. They're going to talk about bylaws and ordinance changes leading up to February 2nd. Take a look at those lists. Go to those meetings and voice it. Like Patrick said, there are going to be some municipalities that are going to, I'm not going to say overreach, but they might try to put setbacks in place where it's just not going to be possible. Things like that. Go there and voice it, but that's where it's going to happen.
Okay.
So if use that law to your benefit.
So do your research, ask questions, show up, all those important things. Thank you, Bill. Your expertise really help us. And if anybody needs to get a hold of you, I know they can reach out to Nancy and she can help find you. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Patrick, you have the last word.
Well, I want to actually thank all of you for attending, for being on here. My grandfather used to always say to me, there's no such thing as a stupid question. You almost took it away from me there, Carol, at the end. Ask questions. Quality questions really create quality opportunities. And I think that we have a tremendous group here on this call and in our communities that can provide resources, that can provide answers, that can help with building. And I really think that this really unique largest investment in state history in housing, is going to make a really impactful change. It's going to put a lot of people to work. It's going to create a lot of investment opportunities. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more discussions we have like this, the more opportunities and the more people it'll impact in a positive way. So keep talking about it, ask questions, and don't be afraid to reach out. And thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Patrick, a perfect way to end this. This Conway conversation came as a result of a little germ of an idea over coffee at Lucky Finn in Situate Harbor, and we're here now. And I appreciate you bringing the idea of the conversation forward, and to be really specific and talk about just this one portion of the housing bill, because the housing bill is, as I said before, massive. There's a lot to it. I invite you all to read through it, read the facts, and be educated on what type of opportunities are out there. I thank you all. This means a lot to me and to all of our listeners that you took your time to share expertise with us today. It was an excellent conversation about a very important opportunity for us. So thank you all. Thank you all for attending today, about all of our listeners, and have a wonderful day. Thanks, everybody.